About that time, Emperor Augustus gave orders for the names of all the people to be listed in record books. These first records were when Quirinius was governor of Syria. Everyone had to go to their own hometown to be listed. So Joseph had to go to Nazareth in Galilee and go to Bethlehem in Judea. Long ago, Bethlehem had been King David's hometown, and Joseph was there because he was from David's family. Mary was engaged to Joseph and traveled with him to Bethlehem. She was soon going to have a baby, and while they were there, she gave birth to her firstborn son. She dressed him in baby clothes and laid him on a bed of hay because there was no room for them in the inn.
That night, in the fields near Bethlehem, some shepherds were guarding their sheep. All at once an angel came down to them from the Lord, and the brightness of the Lord's glory flashed around them. The shepherds were frightened, but the angel said, "Don't be afraid. I have good news for you, which will make everyone happy. This very day in King David's hometown, a Savior was born for you. He is Christ the Lord. You will know who he is because you will find him dressed in baby clothes and lying on a bed of hay." Suddenly, many other angels came down from heaven and joined in praising God. They said, "Praise God in heaven, peace on earth to everyone who pleases God." After the angels had left and gone back to heaven, the shepherds said to each other, "Let's go to Bethlehem and see what the Lord has told us about." They hurried off and found Mary and Joseph, and they saw the baby lying on a bed of hay. When the shepherds saw Jesus, they told his parents what the angel had said about him. Everyone listened and was surprised, but Mary kept thinking about all this and wondering what it meant. As the shepherds returned to their sheep, they were praising God and saying wonderful things about him. Everything they had seen and heard was just as the angel had said.
This Advent, in this difficult year, we've looked into the dark sky for something, for anything to come to us. We've looked, one might say, for a sign. We've looked at the stars during our call to worship as signs, and we've used stories of finding joy, love, peace, and hope in history and in 2020 as signs that God is with us, even in disaster. We've looked to see if the signs that come out of the sky for Mary and Joseph and the shepherds and the Magi might have something to show us in this hardest of hard years. So today, as we now celebrate Christmas, the question is, after doing all of that through Advent, as we now reflect on Christmas itself, on Christ's birth, have we seen the sign that we are supposed to be looking for? Have we seen the sign that we need to take us where we're supposed to go now? Now, in our humdrum everyday existence, we probably most associate signs with driving: a sign to show us what highway we're on, a sign to show us what the speed limit is, a stop sign, a pedestrian sign. And so while thinking about the fact that we've been looking for signs this Advent, I actually think of this very unchristmassy and unflattering story of my own mild to moderate experience with road rage once. What happened was this. I'm driving in Winnipeg, a city in which I already despise most of the other drivers. Winnipeggers, for instance, don't use merge lanes as merge lanes. They use them as places to stop and then to wait for a massive lull in traffic that they need in order to turn onto the road from the complete stop. They also inexplicably often migrate across turning lines at certain key intersections in the city, cutting you off. Now, don't get me wrong. If it's a conversation about winter driving or about what the right and left lanes on a highway are for, I'll choose a Winnipegger over an Oregonian any day. But I must admit that there is no place in the world in which I am more ready to blare my horn at another driver than Winnipeg. So like I said, I'm driving in Winnipeg, hand literally hovering over my horn in anticipation of someone doing something stupid. And I'm at one of those intersections where cars always migrate across lanes when turning, when in fact, there is just one lane for turning left in this case, the lane that I am in. And to the left of that lane, immediately beside me, is a parking lane. And this time there's a convertible in it, clearly not parking and moving towards the intersection. So the light turns green and I begin my turn. And as I make my left turn, the convertible in the parking lane beside me, just as I expected to, begins making a left turn too and migrates into my lane, which is the turning lane. Now, fortunately for all things right in the universe, when I drive in Winnipeg, I am a traffic cop vigilante. And so I blare my horn and I cut that convertible off, firmly teaching that dumb Winnipeg driver a lesson that the universe needed him to learn. And yet, as I cut him off and pull by him, he turns to my open window from the open confines of his convertible, and he doesn't even say thank you. Instead, he says very calmly, "Hey, you're cutting into my lane." To which I say, "Ha, no, go back and look at the sign. This is my lane." To which he says, unconvinced, but carefully, "Sure, okay, man." Like I said, Winnipeg drivers are the worst. But a few weeks later, I'm back at that intersection again. I'm already shaking my head in disgust as I remember what happened last time, and I'm already waiting for the next fool to try to cut me off in the turning lane when I look over and see the sign for the parking lane to my left, which in fact reads "left turn lane," meaning, and I still don't even want to admit to you that this is true, but meaning that the last time I'd been at that intersection and every time I'd been at that intersection, I was the Winnipeg driver migrating across turning lanes. So why do I tell you this story for our Christmas service? I mean, I've already mentioned a convertible with its top down in Winnipeg, so you know that this story doesn't take place anytime close to Christmas. But I tell you this story because of what it revealed to me about signs. And that's this: when it comes to signs, we can often be fixating on the wrong ones. That day I cut the driver off, it wasn't that I wasn't looking for any signs. I had just worked myself up into such a self-righteous tizzy that I was looking for all the wrong signs. A left turn sign for my lane, check. Apparently there were 2 turning lanes there. Another driver to my left, not parking like he should, but moving towards the stop line while I wait for the light to turn green, check. A driver in the kind of car that reeks of narcissism and entitlement, check and check. Sorry to anybody who has a convertible. Before the man even began to make this turn, I had seen all the signs I was looking for at that intersection, and I was ready to do what the signs were showing me I needed to do. The problem was, because I was so fixated on looking for those signs, I missed the one true sign that actually mattered. As you likely know by now, much of what I've preached this Advent has come from a book written by a brilliant writer named Rebecca Solnit, whose book, A Paradise Built in Hell, argues that many of the world's worst disasters have, amidst all of the truly horrible devastation in them, also given rise to life-altering expressions of love, joy, peace, hope, social equality. Solnit wrote the book because even though her experience and research had shown her that those things happen, she noticed that most of what gets written about disasters, from journalists writing in the midst of them to historians writing about them later, focuses on the incidents of citizens committing acts of desperate or opportunistic violence right after a disaster. Incidents that Solnit argues are actually outliers to the experience that almost everyone is having as they love and support one another and try to get through it together. Somehow, those very few stories of violence or looting become the dominant narrative that gets told. On March 11th this past year, in fact, on the day that Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson announced they had COVID, that the NBA suspended its season, and COVID was officially labeled a pandemic, Atlantic writer Van R. Newkirk II released his podcast Floodlines, which presented the findings of his research into what happened during and after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. And in his research, more than anything, Newkirk found this, that the worst destruction, loss of death, loss of life, livelihoods that came after the actual hurricane were worse than what happened during the hurricane itself in some ways, because of the response and lack of response from local, state, and national leaders who were convinced that New Orleans had immediately become a violent war zone and was full of violent and irresponsible people. Based on a few overblown stories of violence and just a few video shots of people looting, many of whom were likely just looking for food and medication, that were shown over and over and over on the news, the same clips, and then all compounded by the fact that most of the victims of Katrina were Black and therefore imagined by white Americans to automatically be violent super predators. The government sent in an inordinate number of police officers and soldiers with the main command to restore order, rather than sending in the aid that people desperately needed. In one particularly awful incident, a police officer, looking for all the wrong signs and seeing them, rolled up on a Black family just trying to walk to safety, screeched to a halt, opened fire, killing 2 of the family members and injuring 4. Why did he do it? As more and more people told made up or wildly exaggerated stories of a few incidents of violence after the hurricane, the stories took on a life of their own, and the media, the nation, and the police began fixing all of their attention on all the wrong signs, seeing people trying to feed themselves and their families as looters, seeing homeless families as gangs. It's a tendency that we actually witnessed here in Oregon this year too. While the Bakers were staying with us during the wildfires, Ben reported some of what he was seeing in his neighborhood's Facebook group. As families like the Bakers left for safety, a group of few locals in their area believed the rumor that looters were on their way to take advantage of the situation. So they refused to leave, and these self-appointed guardians got out their guns and patrolled the neighborhoods, posting details on the Facebook group about things like suspicious vehicles they were seeing in the neighborhood that people should watch out for and keep an eye on. Time and again, however, other locals would post their own responses saying things like, "That vehicle's mine. I've lived here for 10 years. Please don't label me a looter," and encourage people to follow me or confront me. Of course, I know that this is taking things in a pretty discouraging direction on Christmas, so let me move on to what I really want to say to you this morning, which is this. Rebecca Solnit's point in her book, and the point I've been trying to make this Advent, is that we can be liberated from our tendency to fixate on the wrong things and start seeing all the wrong signs. We can be liberated from believing that disasters only bring out the worst in each other. We can be liberated from fixating on things that bring out the worst in us. We can be liberated to see something so much better. We can be liberated by looking for the sign that is Christmas. And what is Christmas a sign of? More than anything, it is a sign that God is with us. We saw that God was with us on First Advent when we looked for where there had been love during and after the Halifax explosion in 1917, and when Oregonians took in displaced families during the wildfires of 2020. We saw God with us on Second Advent when we looked for where there had been joy after the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, and when my mom meditated on what she had seen around her while stuck at home in 2020. We saw God with us on Third Advent when we heard about William James's vision of peace after the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, and as my dad shared so honestly about his struggles with mental health, and showed us some of the woodworking that's been part of how he has continued to pursue shalom in 2020. We saw God with us on Fourth Advent when we considered how the love and equality that flourished after the 1906 San Francisco earthquake inspired a young girl named Dorothy Day to later found the Catholic Workers' Movement. And as Susan Tripp shared about the seeds of hope she saw planted during this election and by the Black Lives Matter movement and in so many other parts of this past year, all of which is to say, by seeing love amidst disaster, we have seen signs that God is with us. By seeing joy amidst disaster, we have seen signs that God is with us. By seeing peace amidst disaster, we have seen signs that God is with us. And by seeing hope amidst disaster, we have seen signs that God is with us. And now today, we gather to remind ourselves that in a world that often encourages us to look for the wrong signs, each year, as people of Jesus, we resist fixating on the wrong signs by gathering around this right sign that we find at Christmas, thereby reminding ourselves to focus on this above all else. That each Christmas, we find a baby born from a pregnancy full of disasters to a people mired in generations-long national, cultural, and religious disaster that has nearly destroyed them. And through that pregnancy, in that time, when nearly all hope could have been lost, God came to be with us. And if God is with us, everything changes, and nothing is too good to be impossible. Now, maybe the disasters around us sometimes feel so great for you that you're not sure you can really even see the love, joy, peace, or hope we've been talking about this Advent. That's natural. Disasters are still disasters. So many of us are going to feel that way sometimes. But even if that's you, the sign that is that baby in that manger is still this for you to cling to. That even in the darkest darkness, when there is nothing else to make any sense of or to make any of it better, God is with you, sitting in that darkness with you, weeping in that darkness with you. God is with you. And if you're feeling ready for a little bit more encouragement on top of that, or maybe even a lot more than that, we also find this sign in that baby that is in that manger. That in the midst of disaster, whenever we can notice even just the tiniest whispers of love, joy, peace, or hope in the darkness, we, like those shepherds, are actually hearing echoes of angels. Echoes still ringing in the air, still singing to us, "Be not afraid. See the signs and know God is with us. God is with us." And so, even in disaster, especially in disaster, love, joy, peace, and hope are the signs that we can choose to guide our way. So, Merry Christmas, AMC family. God is with us. And so even in 2020, we can say to one another, Merry Christmas. Because in Christmas, we are reminded that we have our sign that goodness can and will prevail. We just have to remember to look for it, even when, especially when, like the shepherds, we have to look for it in some very unlikely times and places.